staying still is moving backwards in the security, I think.
Welcome, listeners, to the Industrial Security Podcast. My name is Nate Nelson. I'm here with Andrew Ginter, the Vice President of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions, who's going to introduce the subject and guest of our show today. Andrew, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Nate. Our guest today is Jake Hawks. He is a Senior Product Manager at AVEVA, and his topic is going to be doing product security for AVEVA Enterprise SCADA. And, this is the product that he's the product manager for. And, I know this product line for a long time as the industry leader in control systems for oil and gas pipelines. And today, I know they have many other industries that they're involved with, but the oil and gas pipeline thing, that was in my recollection how they got started, 15, 20 years ago. They used to be called Telvent Oasis, but AVEVA bought Telvent or at least bought the product line. I'm weak on the details. And they renamed it to AVEVA Enterprise SCADA. So that's what we're going to be talking to Jake about, how they do cybersecurity for AVEVA Enterprise SCADA.
Then without further ado, let's listen in to You with Jake.
Hello, Jake, and thank you for joining us. Before we get started, can you give us a few words of introduction about yourself and about the good work that you're doing at AVEVA?
You bet. Yeah, I'm a Senior Product Manager at AVEVA. I'm based here in Calgary, and I'm in charge of the Enterprise SCADA product, which was formerly known as Oasis SCADA. And it predates AVEVA. When AVEVA bought Telvent, essentially, that's how they acquired this product. They acquired this. So AVEVA acquired Enterprise SCADA as part of the carve-out of the software business from Schneider Electric. Myself, personally, I started my SCADA journey about 23 years ago as an intern for a pipeline operator in Australia, where I was first exposed to the Unix version of Oasis. Since then, I've held positions in customer support, technical sales, proposal support, project management, and now product management. Most of my career, I've been in oil and gas, but because our products are used in water and wastewater, I've spent some time over there, as well as transportation, agriculture, and then I took a brief hiatus from oil and gas and did some advanced weather systems, still using Oasis and using some of my computer systems engineering degree with a bit of hardware thrown in for some fun. So I've come a full circle, starting out as an intern on this product, for which I am now the product manager. So very, very satisfying arc of my career.
Thanks for that. Our topic today is sort of the approach for cybersecurity that you folks are using in the Enterprise SCADA product. But before we dive into security, I'm familiar with the product. You guys are here in Calgary. I've sort of watched you from the outside for a very long time. But for everybody else, can you say a few words about what is Enterprise SCADA, who uses it, this kind of thing?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so previously it was known as Oasis, and it has been known as that for longer. So perhaps your listeners know it by that name when we were in Telvent, and before that, Valmet. We've had a lot of names over the years. It is a SCADA system. So SCADA is a acronym, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. It is a computer system or a system of systems, really, that does supervisory control and data acquisition. Not to repeat myself, but that is what it does. It acquires data from across the entire asset, and it provides that situational awareness to the operator who is sitting in a control room operating the asset 24/7, and enables them to send commands to the field to operate the asset. So their job is primarily to move product through the pipeline, but secondarily to keep it all in the pipeline. And so the system starts with bringing back the raw data and allowing controls from the operator to the field. But then that's really its starting point. And then on top of that, we layer applications that make it easier for the operator to manage and operate a pipeline. There are many SCADA systems on the market. Ours comes out of the box with all of these heightened pipeline applications layered on top of it and integrated into it. On top of that, or next to it, if you will, coming out of our same product group, are other pipeline industry applications. We sort of know these as the advisor applications. So we have measurement advisor, we have gas day advisor, commercial advisor. These products then are ancillary products around the SCADA system, and they bridge between the OT space, the control room, with, say, the commercial aspects of buying and selling product from your suppliers and customers, as well as then accounting for the product as it goes through your pipe. So Measurement Advisor is a gas measurement system. We're working on a liquids enhancement to that, so that we'll be able to measure NGLs and other things like that. But the gas measurement accounting system then is a way for the company to bill based on an energy value, not just a volume. So there's an example of some of the layered applications on top. But fundamentally, Enterprise SCADA is a SCADA system. SCADA systems differ from DCS systems, direct control systems, mostly by the way in which the communications is arranged. And DCSs are usually on site with the actual field equipment, like at a compressor station or something like that. Whereas a SCADA system is meant to control the entire pipeline and will often interface with the DCS systems, in the form of talking to the PLC and so on directly. So a SCADA system primarily, but for us, it's the platform on top of which we layer other pipeline-specific applications.
So just a little side note there to give you some insight into the industry, Nate. In my recollection, it was Valmet created Oasis, and then Telvent, a conglomerate, bought Valmet. And then later on, Schneider Electric bought Telvent. And then, as Jake relates, spun off, or sold off their software businesses to AVEVA. So this product went to AVEVA. And very recently, Schneider Electric bought AVEVA back. So the product line has bounced into and out of Schneider Electric for a while. Schneider Electric is a behemoth. They've purchased a lot of stuff, including AVEVA recently. It's a truism of the industry that the industry is very fragmented. There are, you ask what's the world's most, best known, relational database. Well, it probably Oracle, maybe SQL Server, maybe MySQL, which is the free one that everyone uses under the hood of big web applications. 3 of them. That's it. Those are sort of your choices. Yeah, there's other databases in the world, but none of them have the market share that those 3 do. What's the top industrial control system in the world? Dunno. Highly fragmented market. Really dunno what's the top. But nowadays, because Schneider Electric has bought so many other businesses, nobody knows what is the world's most popular industrial control system. But we know that whatever it is, Schneider Electric probably owns it. So that's the world we live in. Thanks for the intro. As I said, I'm here in the same city. I've been watching you folks for some time. I know Telvent and Oasis, and now AVEVA and Enterprise SCADA. I know you folks as pioneers in this space. I know you've been doing this cybersecurity, in the product space for a very long time. I see you as leaders in the space from the very beginning. Can you talk about? I don't know if you want to go into the history, but can you talk about the big picture? What are you doing with cybersecurity in your product line right now? What approach are you taking to that?
Yeah, great question. Our approach is for sure not one of complacence. We became, I mentioned that mine started back in the Unix versions. So when the big switch in the early 90s came, where we went from Unix to NT, we did it for many reasons, not least of which were the fact that it was now just a single operating system to support. The Unix flavors back then were different enough that it really posed some problems for us. But also the switch to NT, which was controversial back in the early 90s, but we did it so that we could leverage Active Directory, Kerberos authentication, and other parts that the operating system would bring to bear for us so that we didn't have to. And that has proved very smart in hindsight. When we first started deploying NT systems with Active Directory, I fully admit I don't think we did it right the first time, but we learned more about Active Directory and started to use Atom, the lightweight directory service, or ADLDS that goes on top of Active Directory, and that really helped our PSR, our performance, stability, and reliability. But prior to that, the security mindset at the time, I think, in our company and throughout the industry, even myself, was mostly security through obscurity. No one thought that a Unix server behind locked doors and air-gapped from the internet was a risk. And ironically, today that actually might be true. Some old legacy Unix system behind locked doors, air-gapped from the internet, probably isn't really a risk anymore, except it is, and I probably shouldn't have said that. But we now have a very robust security model that was ahead of its time back then, but now is becoming the emerging standard in the ICS space. I've attended a couple of Department of Homeland Security working groups where they're looking at formalizing, I guess, or formalizing might not be the quite right word, but essentially centralizing what would be best practice for a topology, a network topology. And it only took a couple of those sessions for me to realize that, they're kind of catching up to where we've been for several years now. So we follow the Purdue model, segmentation, network segmentation, and I could go on and on about what our security model is, but our approach to security in AVEVA is interesting, I think. So as a product manager, I get to decide what R&D does, right? We have a fixed capacity in terms of hours of developer time we can do per year. And at this time of year, frankly, here in November, we're looking at how to spend it next year. One thing that I actually don't have much say over is security. That capacity is sliced away from me, and it is managed by a dedicated security team in AVEVA who are constantly looking at the security industry and the security landscape and are finding things to do and prioritizing them according to a standardized score. And they decide what the R&D is going to do with that percentage of the capacity. Then at the end of the release cycle, when we're getting to release, again, the security mindset in AVEVA is so prevalent that they actually have release veto power on my product. So if we don't meet the right security security score, or if we haven't made sufficient progress, or if our internal code scanning tools reveal a vulnerability that scores high enough, that's it. The release is on hold until those things are resolved. And it is one area where, there's always a little bit of give and take between the business and R&D in terms of balancing priorities and capacities and pressures. But this is one that is not up for debate. And I'm very happy to have experts that are, full-time watching the industry and making sure that the product is as secure as it can be. I'm without trying to sound too immodest, my product moves a lot of petroleum in the world. And I go to bed with the surety that my product is not going to end up on the front page of the newspaper in the following day. And I take that very seriously, and we all do as well. It's a concerted effort. The product group, obviously, when we put out our release, we package up our MSIs and we're done. But then that's the beginning of how our delivery group, what they take it from there, and they deploy it in a secure way, a secure process, so that there's no chance of supply chain infiltration. And then the last layers of security are the customers. And I think this podcast has probably delved into that topic many times around the people, processes, and procedures that customers need to do to secure their system. I like to say that the system is only as secure as the last person who touched it. And so it has to be a comprehensive and holistic approach. Otherwise the cracks will form and then it's game over.
Andrew, maybe I'm just making an obvious assumption here. I would have assumed that in the kind of case that we're talking about here, management tends to run the show, but it sounds to me, based on what Jake is saying, that the developers have a lot more say and control in this process.
That is true, and it's not that unusual. I mean, I've only worked in a handful of businesses in my career doing product development, but where I've worked, and a lot of this was sort of pre-cybersecurity. I'm thinking way back to the early 1990s. When I joined Hewlett Packard. Pre-security, security wasn't a thing back then, but quality was huge because we were producing control systems. And, in Jake's case, the control system is controlling natural gas pipelines and other infrastructure. In our case, it was oil pipelines and power grids. And, when we're developing the control system, we're developing new features. We're adding tens, hundreds, sometimes of thousands of lines of new code into the product every release. Well, I'm sorry. People are human. They make mistakes. If you've added 100,000 lines of code, you've probably added, 500 or 1,000 defects into the product as well. And now you've got to go through and painfully clean them all out. And so we had a quality decision-making process that sounded analogous to what Jake is talking about on the cybersecurity side. The management team set the goal. It has to be, this level of quality so that we're not embarrassed when we release it, so that our customers don't, scream blue murder because their control system is falling over dead every 10 minutes. And then it was up to the managers did not, they weren't face down into the code all day long. The engineers were, the software developers were. And, we were the ones that had to say, okay, there's the bar that's been set for quality. Have we met that bar yet? And if we came back and said, no, we're not there yet, it didn't matter if we were late. It didn't matter how much the manager screamed. They were not going to overrule us because they knew that if they overruled us, the business would be majorly embarrassed. Their necks would be on the line. And so, the people who are close to the problem, very technically, staring at the security holes, staring at the quality defects, they're the ones, that have to assess whether you've met the standard, the requirement. Management can set the requirement, but they generally don't want to vary that for schedule reasons because they're going to be majorly embarrassed. So this is not that unusual. It sort of jives with my own experience in the space.
Imagine that you work in a power plant. You're responsible for a half dozen massive boilers. If a cyber attack makes one of these boilers overpressurize and explode, that explosion will most likely kill you. Which protection from that cyber attack would you prefer? Would you like a mechanical relief valve, one that steam pressure forces open when the pressure gets too high so the steam is released harmlessly? Or would you rather have a longer password on the PLC controlling the boilers? The engineering profession has powerful tools to address physical risk from all causes, including cyber risks. But where is the relief valve in the ISO standard or the Industrial 62443 standard? These engineering tools do not exist in cybersecurity standards. Andrew Ginter's latest book, Engineering Grade OT Security, A Manager's Guide, looks at this topic. You can request your free copy at waterfall-security.com/engineering-grade-OT-security.
A lot of people in the supply chain world are, NERC-CIP has standards saying, are your suppliers trustworthy? Did you buy software or hardware components from untrustworthy suppliers who might have embedded a backdoor? That's not what you mentioned. Lots of other people are talking about, I embedded a library from a trustworthy supplier in my product a year ago and released the product. And today, the vendor of that library has announced a vulnerability. Can I track that? How do I get that out? That's another thing, that's sort of the SBOM topic, the software bill of materials topic that everyone's talking about. Nobody is talking about what I see as the biggest problem, which is the SolarWinds scenario, which is the bad guys get into your system and tamper with the product under development. Yet that's the first thing you mentioned. So I'm a little surprised. Can you go deeper on what you're doing on supply chain and especially the last element, how you sort of secure your development process?
Yeah. Supply chain, it can mean, I think, a lot of different things. So to take those in random order, as part of our FSR, Final Security Review, there are a number of scans that get run against the code base. One of them is third-party library and open source attribution checks. So the open source attribution checks are interesting because when I first learned about them, it included things that I hadn't thought about. For example, we don't like to use open source projects that aren't actively under development. So no abandonware. Obviously, we have to attribute the open source licenses in our product, which we also do, and we know where they all are. But I thought that was interesting too, that only open source that are under active development, and then of course that code gets scanned with our tools as well. The third-party libraries is another thing that is in the FSR process. And we have a hard rule that says that third-party libraries have to remain current for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. We have quite a few third-party libraries in our product, and if any vulnerability is found, we have an obligation to our customers to take the updated third-party library and spin it into a service pack. Bring it into the next service pack. And those rules manifest for us in this way, which is that if you have third-party libraries that are not current, you have to update them when you release your service pack. It's a non-negotiable. Then the last part of this then is really, I think, driven by some of our customers who maybe have some of the NERC-CIP sensitivities, because not all of our customers do. And this is, some people call it the double glove. Essentially, it's how do I trust that the software, the MSI package, the zip file, the VM image, whatever, how do I trust that I can accept that into my secure clean zone, if you will? I'm now the customer. Because that's like a major vector for infection, right? Is that I'm now accepting some large piece of binary software through all of my firewalls and so on. So some customers have taken an extreme approach where they don't want to accept our VMs, and they don't want us to build their VMs. So this is where the double glove approach comes in, where instead of our project team building VMs, which is normal, previously to this, we used to bring hardware to our office here in Calgary, stage the customer's hardware, put the bespoke software on it, tear it all down after FAT, ship it to site, and reassemble it. With the advent of virtual machines, that's basically gone completely by the wayside, and we regularly move VM images around. But some customers are saying, no, we would rather that VM image be built from the ground up here in our clean room, and we actually don't want you touching it at all. So the double glove becomes, gloves behind glass, if you will, where we sit there and watch the customer and instruct and mentor them and say, step them through the installation process that we would normally provide. That's an extreme example. There was one customer that went even more extreme, to the point where we were sitting around with our lawyers scratching our heads like, I'm not actually sure how we will ever get any software to you, because you've kind of closed every potential way in which we could deliver software to you. I'm not quite sure how you would ever take it. So that was an interesting negotiation as well. But yeah, it's an interesting concept. In terms of how to protect our code base, obviously we have code reviews, so with pull requests and so on. So they would have to infiltrate, identity hack or something, our developer. So AVEVA IT it has locked our environments down very, very hard. We have multi-factor authentication for everything that we do. Some things are also behind VPNs as well. We take that very, very seriously, obviously, because if we were to have been breached, then it puts a lot of I don't even want. I'm coming out in hives just thinking about it. But we have an incident response that would kick in at that point. I think we've only had to do it once, and it ended up being nothing, but it was a panic. That was quite a few years ago now, though. I want to assure your listeners that it was a bit of a false alarm. But since then, we take that very seriously, and we have regularly responded to the SBOM kind of questions in RFPs and with customers. We have a very open relationship with our customers with regards to security. So if they do a penetration test, they want to know that we're, going to be interested in their results, and of course we are. Happy to say that the penetration tests that our customers are performing are not turning up anything, or if they're turning up some minor things that we're like, yep, that's safe to ignore. That's reasons that you can turn that off, that kind of thing. And so, like I said at the very beginning, it's a constant evolutionary process here where every time we put out a release, we're always updating our GPOs from the Center of Internet Security, and so on. But I think I'm now straying off the topic of the supply chain question. So, yes, suffice to say, it starts, like I said, it starts from the bottom layer, how we manage our code, how we access our code, how we accept changes, all the way to how we actually get binaries to site for the customer. And this is just the AVEVA on-prem experience, right? The cloud is a different beast, but it has the same kind of security oversight and more because of the nature of cloud.
The point that you made in your question there, and then Jake's response, are kind of interesting. I mean, the subject of supply chain security is not new to our podcast. If I recall, in not so far away episodes, we've been talking about SBOM a few times. SBOM is just a way to account for what the heck kind of software you're dealing with. And it seems like the point that Jake was making there, among others, is that maybe beyond just knowing what's in your product, using only the kinds of software that you can hold to account, that's continuously updated, so that you know that all of the components of your product are ultimately just as securable and enforceable as all the others.
Yes, the thing is that in my recollection, supply chain is like 4 different things. 3 of them, in a sense, are verifiable. The vendor can prove to the customer that they've done it right, and the 4th one is just hard. The 3 that are verifiable are things like did you buy your components, hardware and software, from trustworthy sources, or did you buy them from banned sources? Well, you can look at the components, you can see the labels on them, you can look at your contracts, you can, in the worst case, bring a lawyer in to review the contracts under non-disclosure and prove that you purchased your stuff from, trustworthy sources. Another sort of gotcha is, did you buy, even if the stuff was manufactured by somebody trustworthy, did you buy it from an intermediary who is criminal, who is, taking some of the profits and funding terrorism or something horrible like this? And again, you can prove with your contracts and with your paper trail that you haven't done this. The third one is are there vulnerabilities in the libraries that you've used? And there are tools that can scan the product that can figure out which libraries you've used and which versions. They can verify, the customer can verify that, what you've advertised in terms of your libraries and versions are the ones that are in the product, can go and look to the CVE, the vulnerability database, and prove to themselves that none of these libraries have known vulnerabilities. You can prove all of this. The thing that you can't prove is what I asked about, which is, and in a sense was Jake's first answer. The thing that you can't prove is that, the bad guys haven't snuck a sleeper, a terrorist, or a spy into your development organization who is inserting malware into the product as one of the developers. How do you prove that hasn't happened? That's really hard. And, what you have to do to deal with that risk, you just have to be really paranoid from one end of your development process to the other. It's just hard. And yet that's exactly the behavior, that's exactly the attitude that Jake has described here. So, these folks have been doing this for a long time. They've wrapped their heads around the degree of paranoia you need in your development process to assure that, with a high degree of confidence, that the bad guys aren't sneaking something in under the hood. So, good on them. So that's a lot. I mean, it's, reassuring to hear a vendor with such a, what's the right word, a broad approach to cybersecurity in the product. the leading provider for at least natural gas pipeline control systems, and active in lots of other space. But when we say the word pipeline, the elephant in the room is the Colonial incident. Do you want to talk about that? What was sort of the consequences of that incident for AVEVA and for the whole industry?
Yeah. We had the SCADA director from Colonial join us on stage at our recent pipeline summit here in Calgary. I hosted a cybersecurity panel, and it was the second time we had done it. And Mr. Warrenberger from Colonial, he had joined me previously last year in San Francisco at the AVEVA World Conference, and for the same thing, a cybersecurity panel for our midstream user group. And when he agreed to volunteer for that panel, the first question I asked him is, "Oh, are you sure? Like, do you want to get up in front of everybody?" And he's 100%. And the first thing he says is, "We're sorry, but you're also welcome. We kind of forced us all to become secure, and you should be taking this seriously." And of course, we all are. I don't know. Yeah, and of course, there's limits to what I can talk about, and there's limits to what I know about what happened at Colonial. But our understanding is that the enterprise SCADA system wasn't compromised, and that the shutdown of the pipe was due to an abundance of caution. Our system being air-gapped from the corporate network and designed to operate independently and everything is all well and good until your entire business operations depend on applications that are not in the control room and cannot be air-gapped. So that's that's an interesting thing that the industry is grappling with right now, is how to survive an ongoing cyber incident and not be fined for shutting down, which was sort of the Colonial takeaway that surprised me. So that's very interesting. Is how resilient do we need to be? How does your disaster recovery or business continuity, which are slightly different, how does your business continuity now change, given the idea that maybe you can't shut down? Now, Colonial may have been able to go to manual operations, but some of our larger customers, there just might not be enough people to send out to the field to operate manually, right? And in fact, do you even have when was the last time you tested your manual operation procedure? So these are some of the interesting lessons learned. And like I said, being very transparent about this and the corrective actions that we're making, it's extremely important for the industry to share this kind of knowledge back and forth. So as a result, the TSA rule came out that had a bunch of guidelines and so on. And what we were, so we struck a little committee that met daily to discuss the progression of these rules and to understand how our customers were going to be impacted. Happy to report that because of our topology, because of our design and our approach that I've detailed already, our customers didn't have to do much. One thing that they did have to do was to cycle their system passwords, which for the older versions of our product was a little bit labor intensive, perhaps, and a little bit risky. But our technical support team was able to work with our customers to get those passwords rotated without causing downtime. The later versions of our product, we leveraged group managed service accounts, which is an Active Directory Microsoft Windows feature that rotates these system passwords automatically for you. So going forward, again, our customers have to do nothing there to comply with that rule. However, one other major change for me that affected me as product manager here was how our products interacted with the various third-party security tools. So previously, we had been quite prescriptive. It's a long story, but we had got into the situation where we were testing, integrating, and certifying one third-party security tool. And overwhelmingly, our customers said that, well, we don't want to use that tool because our IT department is forcing us to use this other tool. And so just a note on that, IT-OT convergence, sometimes it's a swear word, sometimes it's the answer to your problem. In this case, the guidance that we've been giving here is don't fight your IT department when picking a security tool. You have to work with them because ultimately you need a holistic response to the entire operations of your business, which includes IT and OT. So it is in your best interest to have an overarching response to this. It doesn't have to be a single tool. You don't want to violate any network security rules or guidelines or best practices, but to have a common response and perhaps a common tool, if not just a single instance of that tool, we think is probably the better way to go. And so as a result, we announced that we were not going to be endorsing any individual tools, nor were we going to be testing them because there's obviously too many and we can't test them all. So instead, we pivoted and we documented in great detail the elements of our product that you need to know about when you're shopping for configuring, testing, and operating a third-party security tool. So I'm talking antivirus, I'm talking allow listing, I'm talking multi-factor authentication, I'm talking host firewalls. So there's several chapters now in our administration guide that step you through what you need to know about our product. So that you can pick those third-party tools and then work with your IT department to consolidate and collaborate on the tools and then the overarching processes that you need to be safe and to sleep well at night.
So Nate, let me add just a bit of background here. I mean, back in the early days of industrial cybersecurity, I was working for a control system vendor, one of Jake's competitors. But every vendor in the industry was facing the same problems, the same demands from customers, the same sort of changing landscape. One of the big issues back then was that the customers were demanding that the vendors support the customer's antivirus system of choice, the customer's whitelisting vendor of choice, the customer's file system change tracking vendor of choice, the files, the host firewall for whatever host the customer was running the software on, any kind of network firewall the customer chose, because of course, enterprise security teams were dictating security choices company-wide, and they would dictate to the OT folks, the engineering teams, you want to use an antivirus, you have to use this one. It's the company standard, which meant that the control system vendors had to support everything. Back in the day, the control system vendors were told you have to support antivirus. So every one of us picked one antivirus vendor. And you have to support firewall. So we picked one firewall vendor and we tested our stuff exhaustively against that one vendor's products. And we documented our stuff for that one vendor's products so that the customer could get some security going. And the customers came back and said, no, we don't want your vendor. We've already standardized on this other vendor. But, if the control system vendors, if we had to support everything, there was enormous costs. I mean, were we supposed to buy one of each antivirus? I mean, buying the antivirus wasn't the cost. The cost was testing against all of the antivirus vendors, all of the antivirus systems to make sure that nothing malfunctioned. There were malfunctions. I mean, if you run a full antivirus scan, everything slows down and stops. And you can't do that with, a power plant or a pipeline. Were we supposed to test our stuff with one of every kind or all of every kind of control system security potential product on the market, all the file system change tracking vendors, all the whitelisting vendors, all the different firewalls? And if we get a support call, what are we supposed to do? The engineers on the other end of the line did not know how to operate the security technology 9 times out of 10. We had to teach them how to operate the security stuff because they hadn't taken training. Enterprise firewalls, I mean, you might be used to doing a little bit of, if you have to do something tricky on your home firewall, well, it's got 6 screens. It's not that hard. I'm sorry, enterprise grade firewalls, you need to take training to figure out how to use this morass of screens. So it was a real problem back then. And over time, everyone had to change. The vendors had to change. AVEVA was one of the leaders in, leading change in that space. But the customers had to change. They had to learn, the enterprise, the engineering teams had to learn that they had to take training. The vendors had to learn that we had to support everything. We had to document everything so that you could use the firewall of your choice, because we documented what ports you need. The vendors had to take training on how to operate their security gear. They had to take training on how to test their security gear, so that they didn't call us and say, "Oh, your stuff is broken," when in fact they'd fumble-fingered the firewall configuration. And all of us had to learn to cut each other a bit of slack. If the engineering team had taken the training and still had a problem, and we had tested the stuff and our stuff still wasn't working, well, we had to come together. So it was a difficult time. Today, the leading vendors in the space support a lot more than they used to back in the day. Maybe not everything. Everyone's learned to make a few compromises. But it was a difficult period for a number of years as we figured this out. Can I ask you one detail you haven't really touched on? The security directors out of the TSA talked about shared trusts and about documenting these things. In my understanding, shared trust is code for Active Directory on the IT side. In a sense, controlling or having the power to create users and manage permissions on the OT side. Can you talk about shared trusts in the Enterprise SCADA product?
Sure. Yeah, I was really excited personally for the idea of single sign-on from the IT domain into the OT domain. It seemed like such an obvious user experience improvement. But to skip to the end, I would say that trusts between domains is now not best practice, right? But if I was to back up a little bit, using Active Directory has, I think we're largely over it at this point. But when we first started to deploy Active Directory, the IT-OT relationship with the customer would really come to bear. It's Active Directory, therefore IT should be in charge of it, right? And in charge of that domain. Now, I don't want to start like a debate amongst your listeners, but there clearly is ways in which you can bring IT into your OT zone to do this management, and obviously, and take advantage of the fact that they've got all the extra stuff. They may have DBAs on staff and so on, but you do need to give them that OT training. They do need to become aware of the differences between OT and IT. So when we started using IT systems like Active Directory, we had to politely but firmly insist that they do not put our product into an IT domain. We don't have that debate anymore. And now, in terms of and we were also at the time, really that many firewalls, that many different domains. Really, that seems like overkill. We don't hear that complaint anymore. Now that it's become best practice. So, trusts were seen as a great way of giving corporate users access to the decision support system, which is that read-only SCADA system that sits in the DMZ between OT and IT. We thought, and it's still true, that it removes the burden from the SCADA administrators for things like accounts and password resets, and then with single sign-on access to the historian in the DSS, they have access to all the historical data they could ever want. However, the user persona of who uses the DSS is changing, and I'm happy to talk about that further if you'd like. But the net of all of this is that without a trust between your IT domain and your OT, even the OT DSS domain, there is no single sign-on. So the DSS now is essentially out of reach from your corporate users, outside of predefined reports and perhaps other things that we have in our product, like a remote HMI that you can peer into it. The future of the DSS is an interesting one as a result of the security landscape changing.
Just a quick clarification. You've used the word DSS a number of times, decision support system. Is that sort of the new branding or a superset of functionality sort of around the historian, or is the historian a different animal than DSS?
So certainly a historian would be in the DSS. The DSS decision support system is not to be repetitive, but it is a system to help people make decisions. So for us, this is a replica of the control system that is in the secure zone, right? So the main SCADA system that the operators are using to send commands to the field. We replicate that into the DMZ network zone, and we call it the DSS. The DSS has no abilities to send commands to the field. So it's a read-only system, but it contains both historical data and real-time data. So our product has a real-time side and a historical side. Our real-time side is obviously what brings back the data from the field and shows it to the operator and then allows the commands to be sent. The SCADA administrator will configure which of those points in the real-time servers need to be historized. And so we will historize that data into a smaller historian in the secure zone purely for trending and for operator trending. Then all of that data is also sent to the DSS along with all the real-time data. And the historian in the DSS will then usually contain a lot more data, a lot older data. But now, and also now, we're seeing that there is another historian outside of that zone in the corporate zone, and AVEVA having purchased OSI Soft, we're seeing Pi. I mean, we would recommend Pi, and putting Pi outside of the OT zones, be it Zone 3 or 3.5, to use the Purdue nomenclature. Putting Pi outside of all of that means it can be the destination for all of your corporate data, not just data from the field. So getting back to the question, DSS, yes, it contains a historian, but it also contains a read-only replica of the real-time, allowing non-operators to see operator screens without the ability to actually do anything other than navigate and see data. So the DSS then, because was designed at the time with a trust for the corporate users, any corporate user then could essentially pretend to be a SCADA operator, with the exception of being able to send commands and change configuration or whatever, just read only. But because the trusts have gone away, the DSS now is inaccessible to them. So we are needing to find a different solution for the DSS to make it, to get it back to what it needs to be, to help people outside the control room make decisions.
Interesting. I mean, some of the features you talk about, giving the anyone with access to the DSS on the outside on the enterprise network, giving them the ability to see the same screens that the operators would have seen if they'd clicked through to them. This, I've heard the word digital twin. I've heard the word digital twin usually applied to a system in the cloud that in some sense emulates the control system, in the OT network, or the physical process in the OT network. Can you talk about, is this a digital twin? And can you talk about the cloud? What is the future of the cloud? Are we talking about operating the pipeline from the cloud? What does the cloud mean security-wise?
Yeah, straight for the jugular. Yeah, SCADA in the cloud. So it used to be that making reference to cloud in my user's presence would have me politely but firmly shown the door. Time marches on, and the cloud is not as scary as it once was. The cloud, remember, is just somebody else's computer. So with our product as it is today on-premise, sometimes the computers are not belonging to the OT, they belong to the IT. Sometimes the data center is in a different building across town. That is a cloud. It's just your private cloud. So I think that the concept of understanding, the risks and so on of on-prem software versus the cloud, we're seeing a shift. So definitely digital twin. It's a bit buzzwordy, of course, but the DSS is essentially like a 20-year-old version, perhaps, of the digital twin. So, just like you say, the digital twin is supposed to be a virtual representation of the entire asset. So I think, for example, that the digital twin will have a big role to play in how we manage and reduce the cost of point-to-point checkouts. If you were able to show to a regulator that you have paperwork all the way from instrument to eyeball, then that you can prove that you know where the changes have been made, you ought to then be able to reduce the amount of effort it takes to do a P2P, a point-to-point checkout. And then that information, should be stored in a digital twin. But digital twin is a lot more than that, and AVEVA is definitely investing heavily in this concept. AVEVA wants to be a cloud-first SaaS business, but that would seem to be at odds with, the world's leading oil and gas control system. So, what I have done then is we're gonna put our toe in the water with DSS in the cloud. So, with DSS being almost useless now to non-control room people, AVEVA brings to bear a bunch of products that replace what the on-premise DSS used to do, and still does for those that are using it, which is everybody. So products like AVEVA Insight, which allows ad hoc user access to analytics and dashboarding. AVEVA Reports, which is Dream Reports rebranded, and then AVEVA Teamwork, which is a workforce automation tool. These are just the first three products that I think we want to bring to the midstream industry. And all of it would be backed by AVEVA Data Hub, which is the OSI soft Pi technology, but in our AVEVA cloud. There are other regions in the world that are actually a little bit more progressive with their thinking about cloud. I have several Latin American customers that are thinking about backup as a service. So a backup control center would normally be like a direct replica of your primary control center, with building, cooling, UPS, racks, power, internet supply, all of the rest of it. They're because they're a little bit on the smaller side. They're interested in shifting that backup server to the cloud in order to reduce their operating costs. And so I'm actively looking into what it would take to make it easier to run enterprise SCADA in the cloud. But I am not advocating for North American oil and gas customers to put their primary control center in the cloud. In fact, I'm not quite sure what the future will bring. I have some visions that I'm working on in terms of the next 20 years or 10 years for enterprise SCADA and the cloud. But suffice to say, we will always have to have some sort of fallback to on-prem, I think. If no other reason, then that's usually where all of your communications infrastructure is originating from. But I can see a future where the cloud has demonstrated its stability and security and reliability to the point where there are customers that are happy to run their SCADA system in the cloud. Now, having said that, we have many SCADA customers that are running our product in an infrastructure as a service, which is a form of cloud, right? The difference, though, is that that's still just VMs, a lift and shift approach. So yeah, the cloud is coming for sure. And even within North America, we have users that are saying, we want to know how you're going to move SCADA to the cloud. And then we have other customers which are saying, don't say cloud in my presence. And then we have some in the middle. And I would say that second one, very few now. In fact, at our Pipeline Summit, I mentioned it already, but I'll say another anecdote from that event was someone come up to me and say, yeah, your DSS in the cloud presentation was very interesting, but I just don't think we'd ever be able to do it. And I was getting ready for the usual list of reasons why we couldn't go to the cloud, right? Security, latency, data privacy, data sovereignty, these kinds of things. But instead, the customer surprised me with the actual reason why they would probably be hesitant to go to the cloud, which is that it would require having to run proxies within the IT DMZ, and they don't have a healthy relationship with their IT group. And that really threw me for a loop, right? Like I said, I was expecting a whole bunch of other pushback as to why we couldn't move to the cloud, but the real reason is because they don't have a healthy relationship with their IT department, right? And the reasons behind that, I hope, are clear. And obviously, we have several firewalls to traverse to get to the cloud and back, and so we need proxies and secure proxies and other things to live in these other network zones outside of OT. I was kind of shocked to hear that there could be customers out there. These were large, and this was a large customer too, that still have such an unhealthy relationship with their IT department. That to me is alarming. And as an industry, I think we ought to be trying to close that gap somehow.
Jake said a lot there, but it sounds like maybe the overall point is that the cloud is complicated, or maybe just too complicated for me.
Well, he did make the point that the industry, the customers who are using these control systems seem to be all over the map. Some are saying, "Over my dead body, read my lips." Some are saying, let's do this. So everybody else is somewhere in between, and it is complicated, relationship wise with IT, reliability wise. Is the internet reliable enough to do a cloud-based control system? Security wise, is it wise to have your control system that exposed to the internet by operating across the internet? Something new that I heard in his answer that I'm still thinking about is the possibility of a backup control center in the cloud, because these control centers, the physical buildings with wiring coming into them, computers throughout, that sit there basically idle through the entire, sometimes through the entire life of the facility, unless you're testing the backup system. It's a big investment, and if you can host your backup in the cloud, in the life of a facility, you might never use it. Are you exposed? Can you design the backup so that, a cloud-based backup so that you're not exposed to the security problems unless you switch over, and you might never switch over? These are all interesting questions that, I'd have to think about. The idea of a backup in the cloud, security-wise, what does that mean? Is something new and something I'm certainly going to be thinking about going forward. Thank you for joining us. Before we let you go, can you sum up for us? What are the most important lessons that you think we should be taking away about the product security and especially product security in your perspective, the way that you folks do it?
Sure. Yeah. Definitely, security is a layered approach. Security in depth is essential, and it starts before you've even written a single line of code, through your design, and then all the way through deployment, and then the last person who touched it. So it is a collective exercise. It starts years before you need it. And you have to invest in it, and you have to continuously invest in it. I mentioned how we pivoted from our guidance on third-party security tools. One of the things that we mention in there is, be sure to understand the resource requirements in terms of human staffing, because if you buy a third-party tool, test it and deploy it, and then never check it, it's not there. It's not doing anything for you. If you're not actively looking at the results and chasing down the false positives and so on, and constantly improving that, you're not progressing. Staying still is moving backwards in the security, I think. So you have to keep on top of it. And then I would say, really in terms of cloud, this is my chance, I guess, to talk a little bit about where we want to go with the product into the future. Is, I guess, maybe introspectively look at some of the prejudices that you have about cloud, and really ask yourselves the kind of questions that you're going to get from me if you challenge me in person, right? Which is latency and data privacy, data security. So, the data security one, it's like, do you think that you have more people on your security task force than AVEVA does? Because I can tell you, we have quite a few people looking at, at DevOps and the security landscape, as I've mentioned many times. So it's maybe have that introspection and challenge some of your internal prejudices. But security, like I said, it's extremely important, and it's a group effort. It needs to be a collective effort. And if you want to know more about how AVEVA is keeping the world secure, I guess, is to reach out to your account manager if you're already a customer, or hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to start this discussion with you and put you in touch with people who can continue this discussion with you. We're only a software vendor. You need to be having this discussion with all of your vendors, your PLC vendors, your payroll vendor, and so on. It's like it's no point locking only one door of your house, right? You have to look at all of your doors, and that starts with even finding them. There are companies out there that will help you even just understand what your security footprint is before you even start figuring out how to secure it. So I think it. But you know what? We have a great industry. Lots of fantastic people like for yourself that are promoting these kinds of security concepts. It's extremely important that we all get on board and do have those conversations with your IT team. Try to make them friends instead of enemies. No back-to-back firewalls because you don't trust the other guy's firewall, right? And I have seen that multiple times, which is sad, but there it is. But our product is secure. Come and have a look. We have our AVEVA conference next year. We're going to do our pipeline summit again in Calgary, I think. Again, so watch out for that. And hit me up on LinkedIn and let's take this conversation deeper. I want to know more about why we don't want to go to cloud, because I need to start formalizing a strategy for that. So, very interested. Thanks for having me on, Andrew.
Andrew, that was the conclusion of your interview with Jake Hawks. Do you have anything else you'd like to take us out with today?
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed. I asked hard questions and I heard a lot of the right answers. I mean, deep, transparent documentation so people can make informed decisions about using the security tools of their choice. This is the right answer. Vendors used to push back on this, and AVEVA isn't anymore. A security budget for the development team sounds really interesting. This is it sounds like the right answer. If you don't have that, the push for features, the push for schedule tends to muscle out security investments, and you can't afford to do that. So, you give that decision-making authority over to the development team. You take it out of the hands of management, in a sense, deliberately, because management wants security as well. Paranoia is the right answer to assure the integrity of the development process. And he's right. AVEVA, he at AVEVA looks at one thing, the product. But his point that owners and operators have to have this security conversation with all of their vendors, with all of their teams, with their IT teams and their engineering teams. It's a big picture, and we all need to be talking to each other and doing the right thing. So again, I'm very impressed.
Well, thank you to Jake Hawks for all of that, and Andrew, as always, thank you for speaking with me.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Nate.
This has been the Industrial Security Podcast from Waterfall. Thanks to everyone out there listening.